The company dining room was lit with an almost opulent glow, and the conversations around it seemed like a symphony of ambitions and vanities. I was there, like a displaced shadow, trying to understand why my presence at that event caused my wife so much discomfort. For weeks, she had insisted that I didn't need to attend, claiming that these dinners were boring and repetitive, but there was something about her reluctance that made me insist on being there. And now, I knew why. She went in with him. There was no hesitation, no sign of regret in their eyes as they walked together, smiling as if the entire world was theirs. Not only was he a stranger to me, but he seemed to be intimate with everyone around him. How could I not have noticed before? Everything made sense, the excuses to stay late at work, the messages quickly deleted from my cell phone, the phone calls interrupted when I entered the room. Every detail that I ignored was there, forming a truth that was impossible to ignore. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain control as I watched her from afar. She was in her element, laughing, lightly touching his arm as they chatted with other classmates. The hypocrisy was suffocating. It was as if she had carefully designed a scenario where I didn't belong, and her surprised expression upon seeing me at the entrance only confirmed my suspicion. The mask she wore was starting to fall apart. "So that's why you didn't want me to come to the company dinner," I said, my voice firm and sharp, enough to silence those around us. Her gaze wavered between panic and challenge. "So I don't find out about your affair. Let's get a divorce now." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment it looked like he was about to intervene, but my determination made him hesitate. She tried to say something, stuttering explanations that I didn't want to hear, but I had already made up my mind. Her every word felt like an insult to our history, every justification a knife buried deeper. There were looks from all sides. Some hid their curiosity, while others watched with obvious morbid pleasure, as if they were anxiously awaiting the imminent explosion. "I can explain," she began, but I raised my hand, cutting her off. "There is nothing to explain. Actions speak louder than any excuse you can come up with." The silence around was overwhelming. The lover, who until then maintained a posture of security, finally spoke, his voice filled with false calm. "I don't think this is something to resolve here, in front of everyone." I turned to him, allowing the full weight of my indignation to show in my gaze. "And you think you have the right to give an opinion? You, who got involved in my life without any respect or morals." His expression hardened, but he didn't respond. It didn't need to. Guilt was written in every line of his face. As she desperately tried to avoid a public meltdown, my world fell apart in slow motion. Memories of our wedding, the happy moments, the promises whispered at the altar, everything seemed like a distant dream that was now turning into an unbearable nightmare. She had destroyed not only our relationship, but my faith in everything I believed to be unshakable. "I never wanted it to come to this," she said softly, as if to appeal to what was left of our bond. "I still love you." That's when I laughed, a bitter laugh that resonated through the room, breaking the heavy air. "Love? If this is love, I'd rather live without it." And I left, leaving her there, center stage, exposed and unprotected. As I walked towards the exit, I felt the eyes follow me. I knew that night was not the end, but just the beginning of a much bigger, darker truth. I needed to understand how far this betrayal went, what else was hidden in the shadows of our seemingly perfect life. However, what I still didn't know was that this dinner was just the tip of the iceberg. What secrets did they share? What lies were yet to come? And more importantly, how would I rebuild my life from the ashes of this devastating betrayal? What waited beyond that door was so much more than I could have ever imagined. Welcome to our channel. Here, we never support or justify any type of betrayal. Our stories are fictional and have a clear purpose, to show how betrayal can devastate lives and destroy precious bonds. Get ready to dive into an intense narrative, full of twists and turns and strong emotions. Take a deep breath, because what you are about to hear is a shocking and unforgettable story. Good story. It was a peaceful night when Daniel parked the car in his driveway, feeling the comforting warmth of the routine he had built over the years. The aroma of freshly prepared food escaped through the kitchen window, where Clara, his wife, was stirring something in a pan, with movements he knew as well as his own breathing. For many, they represented the perfect couple. He is a dedicated and hard-working man, a manager in a respectable company, always concerned with providing the best for his family. She is an elegant and charismatic woman, known for her ability to balance the demands of her personal and professional life without ever appearing overwhelmed. Inside the home, every detail seemed carefully chosen to reflect who they were as a couple. Photographs spread across the walls told a story of travels, parties and family celebrations. In the living room, a fireplace that was rarely used yet emanated a sense of coziness, surrounded by furniture that Clara insisted on renewing whenever possible, arguing that the environment needed to evolve with it. Daniel, on the other hand, preferred stability, believed that some things should remain untouched, as silent witnesses of the stages they overcame together. Although their marriage had its ups and downs, there was a connection that Daniel considered unbreakable. He vividly remembered the day he met Clara. She wore a blue dress, had an easy smile, and seemed to light up any room she entered. He felt, at that moment, that his life would never be the same again. Over the years, Clara became his anchor and his inspiration, even if, lately, he felt a certain distance in her gestures, something he attributed to the pressures of work. That night, as Clara was setting the table for dinner, Daniel walked up to her, noticing the way her hair fell over her shoulders. "It looks delicious," he said, trying to hide the tiredness accumulated after another long week of meetings. Clara smiled briefly, but there was something in her eyes, an absent glow, that he decided to ignore. It wasn't unusual for her to be distracted lately, after all, her new role in the company demanded more of her than ever. He preferred to believe that it was just a reflection of an agitated period. As they ate dinner, Clara mentioned the upcoming corporate dinner. She explained, in an almost casual tone, that it would be a formal and probably boring event. "You don't have to go, you know how these things are," she commented, without looking up from her plate. Daniel, however, decided it would be a good opportunity to be by her side, something he felt they needed to do more often. Her gaze lingered on his for a moment, but she nodded, without insisting otherwise. The following days were like any other in their routine. Daniel woke up early, prepared coffee while Clara read the news on the tablet, and they both went to their respective jobs. Clara always seemed to be busy, answering messages or planning something in her busy schedule. He, in turn, spent hours at the office, dealing with deadlines and reports, but he always found time to send her a message, even if it was something as simple as, "Thinking of you." When the evening of the dinner finally arrived, Clara looked exceptionally elegant. The dress she chose shaped her curves in a way that caught Daniel's attention, reminding him how much she was still the woman he fell in love with. She, however, was more focused on making sure everything went according to plan. "I hope you have fun," she said, a little hurriedly as she adjusted her earrings in the mirror. He smiled, joking that events like this were more her thing than his. The company where Clara worked had rented a luxurious ballroom in a renowned hotel, and the atmosphere was one of pure professionalism. Daniel felt slightly out of place upon entering, but Clara quickly began introducing colleagues and managers, ensuring he didn't feel like an outsider. The way she navigated between people was impressive. Clara had a unique way of talking, an ability to make anyone feel important, even if it was just for a few minutes. Daniel watched everything with a mix of pride and admiration. Clara had an energy that seemed inexhaustible, a charisma that he knew was one of the reasons why she was so respected in her workplace. He stood by her side, smiling and interacting when necessary, but mostly absorbing the scenery. There was something about those events that made him feel like a fish out of water, but being by Clara's side made it all bearable. Throughout the night, Clara disappeared for a few moments, probably to resolve something related to the event. Daniel took the opportunity to grab a drink and observe the room from afar. He saw colleagues talking animatedly, managers exchanging formal greetings and Clara moving around the room with a ease that seemed natural to her. Everything seemed in order, but there was a feeling he couldn't quite place, something that made him question what exactly was different that night. When Clara returned, there was a subtle tension in her shoulders. She continued smiling and talking as if nothing was out of the ordinary, but Daniel noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she held the wine glass. He didn't mention anything, deciding that now wasn't the time. But as dinner continued and conversations flowed, he couldn't help but feel that there was something more going on. That night, when they returned home, Daniel couldn't sleep right away. He lay there, listening to Clara's calm breathing beside him, trying to find some logic to the thoughts that tormented him. Clara seemed to be carrying a burden he couldn't identify, and the idea that she didn't trust him enough to share whatever that burden was bothered him deeply. As the days passed, Daniel began to pay more attention to details, little signs that he might have ignored before. The occasional laughs on the phone, the meetings that went on for hours without a convincing explanation, the prolonged silences between them. He tried not to entertain suspicions, but the uneasiness grew like a shadow he couldn't avoid. Still, he remained steadfast in the belief that whatever it was, they would overcome it together. Daniel was always the type of person who saw dialogue as a solution, who believed that no problem was big enough to destroy what they had built. He loved Clara, he had no doubt about that. But sometimes, even the strongest love isn't enough to hold back the secrets that hide in the shadows. The feeling of something about to explode hung in the air, invisible but palpable. Daniel didn't know it yet, but that night at the company dinner would be the catalyst for a change he could never predict, the starting point of a journey that would lead him to question everything he believed about love, trust and betrayal. And deep down, he feared that when the truth came out, he would no longer recognize the life he had. The days following the corporate dinner were marked by a silent restlessness that seemed to invade every corner of the house. Daniel watched Clara with renewed attention, noticing nuances in her gestures that had previously gone unnoticed. The way she avoided eye contact during certain conversations, the slight tremor in her hands when she was asked about something trivial, or even the smiles that seemed mechanical in moments when, in the past, they would have been genuine. All of this fed the feeling that something was wrong, but he couldn't say exactly what. Clara, on the other hand, seemed busier than ever. His hours at the office lengthened, and cell phone messages became more frequent, accompanied by muffled laughs or short sighs. Daniel tried not to interpret these moments as anything more than coincidences, but the uneasiness grew. He wondered if he was exaggerating, if the exhausting routine wasn't really responsible for the distance he felt. However, every time he tried to convince himself of this, his intuition seemed to whisper otherwise. One afternoon, Daniel decided to leave work early, something he rarely did. He wanted to surprise Clara, to show that he still cared and that he was willing to make an effort to rekindle their closeness. She stopped by the flower shop, carefully chose a bouquet of white lilies, her favorites, and drove home with a slight nervousness in her chest. When he arrived, he noticed that the lights were off, except for the soft lighting in Clara's office. It wasn't unusual for her to be alone in that space, but something about the absolute silence of the house made him hesitate before entering. Opening the door slowly, Daniel called out to her, but there was no immediate response. The sound of hurried footsteps upstairs made him frown. Going up the stairs, he saw that the office door was just ajar. As he approached, he noticed Clara on the phone, speaking in a low tone but full of an intensity he didn't recognize. He heard fragments of sentences that didn't make sense to him, but that clearly carried a weight that she was trying to disguise. When Clara noticed his presence, it was as if a veil of tension had fallen over the room. She hung up the phone quickly and looked at him with an expression that mixed surprise and embarrassment. "You're early," he said, trying to sound casual, but Daniel heard the nervousness in his voice. He didn't want to pressure her at that moment, but the weight of what he had witnessed stayed with him, echoing in his thoughts even after Clara assured him it was just a work call. In the days that followed, Daniel's distrust began to consume his thoughts. He didn't want to believe anything was wrong, but the evidence piled up like pieces of a puzzle he dreaded putting together. Clara became more evasive, her answers increasingly vague, and her cell phone seemed like an inaccessible secret. Daniel tried to confront her once or twice, but each attempt was met with irritation or a sudden change of subject that made him retreat. Then a seemingly insignificant event changed everything. During a casual dinner with some colleagues, one of them, unaware of the growing tension between Daniel and Clara, mentioned something that seemed harmless: how close Clara seemed to a new team member. The name, although unknown to Daniel, was engraved in his mind. He tried to hide his reaction, but the comment lit a flame of doubt that he couldn't put out. The next day, Daniel decided to act. He knew he couldn't continue living in that silent anguish, imagining scenarios that could be the result of his paranoia. I needed answers. During his lunch break, he called the reception of the company where Clara worked and asked to speak to her, claiming it was something urgent. When he was informed that she had left for a meeting outside the office, something in him broke. Clara had never mentioned this meeting, and the information seemed to contradict the agenda she had shared with him. Upon leaving work that day, Daniel made a decision he never imagined he would need to make. He drove to the restaurant mentioned by one of Clara's colleagues during dinner. He didn't know exactly what he expected to find, but a part of him believed it might just be an unfortunate coincidence, a misunderstanding. When he parked the car and entered the place, his heart seemed to beat at an unrestrained pace. And then he saw it. Clara was sitting at a table in the corner, laughing at something the man in front of her had said. It wasn't a polite or forced laugh, but a laugh that brimmed with intimacy. Her eyes sparkled in a way Daniel hadn't seen in a long time. He stood still for a few moments, unable to process what was before his eyes. Their hands were too close together on the table, their complicit smiles were evident. Daniel didn't know how he managed to get out of there without being noticed. He got back into the car and stood there as the reality of it all hit him like an avalanche. The corporate dinner, the phone calls, the evasive looks, everything seemed to fit into a context that he didn't want to believe was real. He felt anger rising within him, but also a deep sense of betrayal that left him breathless. When Clara arrived home that night, she found Daniel sitting on the couch, holding the bouquet of now withered lilies that he had forgotten about days before. She hesitated when she saw him there, and for a moment, guilt flashed in her eyes before she tried to hide it. "Are you well?" he asked, his voice a little lower than usual. Daniel stood up slowly, holding the bouquet tightly enough to crush some of the petals. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking, his voice firm but charged with emotion. "Clara, we need to talk." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara knew, at that moment, that he had discovered something. What she didn't know was how much he knew, and whether he was prepared to face the consequences of what he had been hiding. Daniel, in turn, knew that this would be just the beginning of a much darker truth that was about to emerge. Daniel remained standing before Clara, the bouquet of lilies crushed in his trembling hand, as the tension in the room seemed to choke the air. Clara tried to maintain a neutral expression, but the nervousness in her eyes betrayed her. She knew that something had changed and that this would not be just any confrontation. He took a deep breath, as if he was gathering the last of his strength to find the right words, but when he began to speak, his voice didn't just carry anger, there was pain, a pain so deep that it made Clara take a step back. "I just need you to tell me the truth," Daniel said, each word coming out as a conscious effort. "No fuss, no excuses. The truth, Clara. You owe me this." Clara opened her mouth to speak, but hesitated. It was as if the words were stuck in her throat, weighing more than she could bear. "Daniel, she began, but stopped when she saw his gaze harden, as if begging her not to try to manipulate him with half-truths. "You think I don't know? Do you think I didn't see you with him?" Daniel continued, his voice rising slightly but still controlled. He threw the crumpled bouquet onto the couch, as if to symbolize what was left of what they had. "I was there, Clara. I saw. There's no more pretending." The impact of his words was like a punch, and Clara felt her legs weaken. She didn't know how to respond, How to erase the image of her betrayal that was now clear before him. "I never wanted this to happen," she murmured, her voice breaking. "It wasn't something planned, Daniel. I made a mistake." Daniel laughed, but it was a dry sound, devoid of any humor. "A mistake?" "No. To make a mistake is to forget a date, it is to miss something important. That, Clara, was not a mistake. It was a choice. A choice you made over and over again, while I was here, believing in you, in us." She tried to get closer to him, but Daniel took a step back, raising his hand as if to keep his distance. "Please no. Not now," he said, his voice cracking momentarily. "I want to understand. When? Why? Why did you think this was something you could do to me, to us?" Clara felt tears run down her face, but they brought no relief. On the contrary, they seemed to intensify the guilt that consumed her. "I was feeling lost," she began, stumbling over her words. "With work, with everything. I felt invisible, like I was just existing, not really living. He showed up and made me feel." "Don't finish that sentence," Daniel interrupted, pain evident in his eyes. "Don't try to justify this by telling me he made you feel something I didn't. Because, Clara, I've been here the whole time. I've been here, trying, even when things got hard. You never spoke, you never gave me the chance to fix what was wrong." Clara tried to respond, but couldn't find the words. Daniel ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he made when he was trying to control his emotions. "I can't understand how we got here," he said, more to himself than to her. "I thought we were stronger than that. That you were stronger than that." The silence between them was heavy, interrupted only by the sound of Clara's muffled sobs. Daniel looked at her, trying to find traces of the woman he loved, but all he saw was a stranger, someone who had betrayed him in a way he never imagined possible. After a moment that seemed to last an eternity, he spoke again, but this time his voice was cold, almost monotonous. "I can't live like this anymore. I can't look at you and pretend nothing happened. I'm leaving, Clara. I need time to think, to understand how to rebuild my life, without you." Clara felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "Daniel, please. Don't do that. Don't go. I can fix this, we can fix this." "Do you think it's that simple?" he replied, his voice gaining strength. "You broke something, Clara, something we may never be able to fix. And it's not my fault. You did it. You destroyed what we had." Daniel grabbed his car keys and headed towards the door, but before leaving, he turned around one last time. "I loved you more than anything. And now, I don't know if that means anything. But know one thing, Clara, you ended what we were. And that's something I'll never forget." He left, leaving Clara alone in the middle of the room, surrounded by a silence that seemed to swallow everything around her. She fell onto the couch, feeling the weight of her choices finally crashing down on her. Tears flowed uncontrollably, and for the first time, she realized the extent of the damage she had caused. The house, once a refuge, now felt empty, cold, a painful reminder of what she had lost. Daniel drove aimlessly for hours, trying to organize his thoughts, but everything seemed like a blur. He knew there was still more to discover, more pieces of that dark puzzle that needed to fall into place. But for now, all he wanted was distance, space to breathe. What he didn't know was that, behind that betrayal, there was something even deeper, something that would change not only his perception of Clara, but his entire life. Something he would discover very soon. Daniel's car glided down the deserted road, streetlights illuminating his tense face as he fought the avalanche of thoughts that threatened to swallow his sanity. The radio was off, the only music was the sound of tires on the asphalt and the incessant pounding of his heart. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but he needed to leave, escape that house, the weight that Clara had placed on him with her betrayal. Each kilometer traveled seemed little, as if the physical distance was unable to erase the wound that throbbed in his soul. He parked in a small park he used to frequent in the early years of his marriage. It was a peaceful place, with weathered wooden benches and trees that swayed gently in the wind. Daniel sat on one of the benches and placed his hands on his head, feeling the cold of the night penetrate his skin. The silence around him was almost deafening, but within him there was a tumult that he could not contain. He tried to focus on his breathing, on something tangible, but all he could think about was Clara's expression, the pain he saw in her eyes but could no longer care to comfort. As he stared at the ground, memories began to invade him mercilessly. Her smile at the altar on her wedding day, the way she used to hold his hand in moments of doubt, the nights when they laughed together as if they were the only ones in the world. He had trusted her with every part of himself, believing that the love they shared was invincible. But now, that love felt like a sandcastle, undone by the tide of her choices. Daniel tried to find some logical explanation, something that could make it seem less cruel. But the more I thought, the more I realized there was no justification. No matter how many times Clara said she felt lost, invisible, or unappreciated, she still chose betrayal instead of talking to him, instead of asking for help. She had crossed a line he didn't know if he could forgive. And this placed him before a dilemma that seemed impossible to resolve. When dawn came, Daniel realized that he had spent the entire night in the park, without being able to sleep a wink. He returned to the car, exhausted, but with a decision made. He needed answers, not to fix the marriage, but to understand what else was hidden in that story. He knew that Clara hadn't told him everything, that there were secrets behind the betrayal that he didn't yet know. And he couldn't move forward without digging them up. When he arrived home, he found everything silent. Clara was in the kitchen, her eyes red and sunken, as if she hadn't slept either. When she saw him enter, she tried to say something, but he raised his hand, asking for silence. He wasn't ready to hear any more excuses or justifications. He walked right past her, went upstairs and started packing some clothes into a small suitcase. As he packed his things into his suitcase, his mind revolved around the need for space. He needed to get away for a few days, find clarity away from that house that now seemed like a cemetery of memories. Clara went up the stairs after him, stopping at the bedroom door. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You can't just walk away, Daniel. Please, we need to talk." He closed the suitcase with a snap and turned to her, his eyes fixed on hers, cold and determined. "I need time, Clara. I can't look at you now without thinking about everything you destroyed. I need to understand what to do with all this." She took a step toward him, but he instinctively stepped back, as if her proximity were a burden he couldn't bear. "And when you come back," she asked, her voice shaking with fear and desperation. "What happens when you get back?" "I don't know," he replied, sincerely. "But I know that if I stay here now, I won't be able to think clearly." Daniel left, leaving Clara alone again. He didn't have a destination in mind, but drove to a simple hotel in the nearby town, where he checked in with the intention of staying at least a few days. In the silence of that room, he allowed himself to think, but the answers still seemed as distant as before. Over the next few days, Daniel began to put the pieces together. He revisited memories, conversations and moments that, at the time, seemed insignificant, but now took on new meaning. Every fragment of Clara's betrayal seemed to point to something bigger, something he couldn't yet fully see. There were unanswered questions, gaps in the story Clara had told, and he knew he needed to face them. It was on one of these nights, while he was mentally reviewing everything that had happened, that Daniel made the decision to confront not only Clara, but also the man she had become involved with. He needed to understand his role in all of this, and perhaps, discover what Clara didn't have the courage to say. Daniel returned home the next morning, determined. Clara was waiting for him, anxious and apprehensive, but he didn't waste time beating around the bush. "I want to know everything, Clara," he said, his voice firm. "Be honest with me, because I'm going to find out anyway." She hesitated, clearly fighting the urge to defend herself. But something in his expression, in the determination in his eyes, made her realize there was no way around it. "Okay," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I'll tell you. But you need to promise that you will listen to me until the end." Daniel nodded, but his mind was prepared for the worst. He knew that her words would change everything, but what he didn't yet know was that that truth would bring to light something that went far beyond betrayal, something that would put him in front of a choice he never thought he would have to make. The tension in the air was almost palpable as Clara prepared to reveal what was hidden in the shadows, something Daniel had no idea the impact it would have on his life. Clara sat on the couch with her hands clasped, the weight of silence in the room making every second unbearable. Daniel was standing a few feet away, as if he needed to maintain a physical barrier to withstand what he was about to hear. She knew there was no longer any way to escape. Every lie, every omission, every wrong decision had led her to that inevitable moment. But even now, with the words on the tip of her tongue, there was a paralyzing fear. What would be left of her when everything was said? Daniel crossed his arms, impatient. "Start, Clara. I won't ask again." His voice was low, but there was an unshakable strength in it that made Clara shiver. She took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts, but her emotions overflowed, and the first words came out shakily. "I didn't plan any of this, Daniel. It was a sequence of bad choices, fueled by a feeling of emptiness that I didn't know how to fill. When he showed up, it seemed like he had all the answers to questions I didn't even know I was asking." Daniel didn't say anything, but the way he tilted his head slightly indicated that she should continue. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her courage, and continued. "I thought I could control the situation, that I would never let it go overboard. But I was wrong. I got more involved than I should have, and there was more going on than just the two of us." The silence stretched on, filled with tension. Daniel finally broke the moment, his voice as cold as a blade. "What do you mean by more things? Clara, if you know something that I don't know, now is the time to tell me." She hesitated, the words stuck in her throat. "He wasn't just a coworker, Daniel. He had intentions. He knew exactly what he was doing when he approached me. He wanted information." "Information about you?" Daniel frowned, confusion mixed with a hint of disbelief. "Information about me? What does that mean?" Clara bit her lip, the fear in her eyes more evident than ever. "He knew you were working on confidential projects. He knew you had access to sensitive information, and he thought he could use his proximity to me to get what he wanted. I realized too late that he was manipulating me." Daniel took a step back, as if he needed to distance himself from the gravity of what he had just heard. His mind spun as he tried to fit the pieces together. What seemed like just a personal betrayal now took on much greater proportions. He felt a wave of anger and indignation rise within him, but also a deep pain as he realized how much Clara had become a piece in this dark game. "Are you telling me he was using you to spy on my work? That this whole relationship was part of a bigger plan?" He shook his head, unable to hide the bitterness in his voice. "And were you naive or complicit, Clara? Because honestly, I don't know what to think anymore." Clara began to cry, but Daniel did not give in to compassion. He knew he needed to deal with this rationally, that what was at stake was bigger than just his feelings. He walked away, picked up the phone, and called a trusted contact at his company, someone who could help him confirm whether anything had been compromised. As he waited on the line, he looked at Clara as if she were a stranger, someone he no longer recognized. After a tense conversation full of information that only confirmed his worst fears, Daniel hung up the phone with a knot in his stomach. "Clara, you don't understand the gravity of what you did. This isn't just about the two of us. This could compromise not only my career, but the safety of many people. I need to sort this out, but you need to get out of here." Clara's eyes widened, surprised by the firmness in his voice. "Daniel, please, I know I made a mistake, but I can help. I can try to fix it. He shook his head, exhausted. You've done enough. Now, I need to think, I need to understand how to get out of this situation without it destroying even more lives. And you need to reflect on the choices you made and how much it got us here. Clara left the house shortly after, her footsteps echoing down the sidewalk as she walked away from everything she knew. She knew she had lost Daniel, but what terrified her even more was the uncertainty of what would come next. Daniel, in turn, plunged into a sequence of phone calls and meetings to ensure the situation was brought under control before any irreparable damage was done. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's life turned into a whirlwind of legal action, investigations, and long nights trying to process everything that had happened. He learned, through colleagues, that the man Clara had been involved with had been unmasked and was facing serious charges. Clara, on the other hand, disappeared from his life, choosing to move to another city, away from the judgmental eyes and the pain she had caused. Daniel, although devastated, found strength in rebuilding. He met new people, formed new bonds, and eventually found someone who helped him see that there was still hope for love, even after everything. Clara, in turn, had to deal with the consequences of her actions, rebuilding her life from the ashes of her choices. And so, the two followed different paths, marked by scars that would never completely disappear, but also by lessons that would shape who they would become from that moment on. If you've made it this far, what did you think of this story? Share your opinion in the comments, we really want to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Remember, this channel does not support cheating of any kind. Until the next story.